Hello, I'm Owen, and today is the first of hopefully a few new videos around how to play Dungeons & Dragons. So today we're going to go over the essentials, and pretty much the bare minimum of what you need to know to play. So, first of all, what do you need? Well, I would recommend having dice or some sort of online dice generator, kind of like random dice rolls. But you can always get a set of dice. They consist of usually your average, your d6, so 6-sided dice, d12, which isn't used actually as much as it should be. It's kind of underappreciated, but 12-sided dice. Most importantly, the d20, 20 sides. And we've also got, you don't need both of these, but 2 d10s, also called a d percentile. One of them, if you see up close, has 2 numbers on it. This is to represent the tens digit when you roll both of them, and the other one is just a normal 10-sided dice with 1 digit on each side. As well, you've got the d8, 8 sides, and last but not least, the lovely caltrop, the d4, which has 4 sides. These ones actually have a few different ways that they can be made. They can either have the numbers at the top, which is when you roll them, you count whichever one's pointing up, or they have numbers along the sides. I don't have a version of one of those with me right now, but that would be in between the 3 and the 2. You might have 3, for example, and then if you rolled and that would be on the bottom, you'd have 3 all along the dice, and so then you would count that one as you'd rolled a 3. There's also a few other versions of these. There's a neat one that has all the corners sort of rounded off. You can find those, of course, at gaming stores along with all the other dice. Some people may say you need miniatures or a battle map. This isn't required. There are 2 main ways to play Dungeons & Dragons. There's a visual way, sort of with maps, miniatures, figures. You don't even need miniatures for this. You might just need some sort of way to represent yourself. People do this online or in real life, which is kind of the preferred version. These would be figures like this, and little guys. For the players and the monsters, of course, they don't need to be like it. You don't need that to play Dungeons & Dragons. There's also the Theater of the Mind, which is where the DM, or the person in charge of the game, does a lot of description. There's a lot of, you've got to keep it all up in here. Of course, I'll go into maybe more detail in another video about those methods. But pretty much, first of all, we said you need dice. Okay, you got dice. Then I'd recommend having some sort of access to the Dungeons & Dragons rules. Without the rules, you're technically not playing Dungeons & Dragons. This is with, like, if you're playing Pathfinder, for example, you want the Pathfinder rules. Call of Cthulhu rules. Of course, for these videos, we're focusing on 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, so you can get those in a few ways. D&D Beyond is great for anybody who doesn't have the money to buy any of the books, just wants the bare minimum rules, wants to get a taste for that. That I will put a link in the description below. As well, we have the Player's Handbook, which is, if you get into the game, I recommend getting. This book has all the rules for any player, and honestly I'd recommend it for any Dungeon Master as well. It goes over the basic rules of how to play. As well, the beginning of it has a great introduction to Dungeons & Dragons, which I am basing this video off of. So I'd highly recommend getting this if you're starting off. As well, if you don't get this, if you buy any of the starter sets for Dungeons & Dragons, they will include rules that are similar to that in the Player's Handbook, although you won't have access to as much information. Same with D&D Beyond, has similar stuff to a starter set. So you've got the rules, you've got dice. What you also need are players, of course. I'd recommend 2 or more players. You kind of can't play Dungeons & Dragons by yourself. I'm sure someone has figured out how to do that. I have no idea how to. But pretty much 2 players. I'd recommend, honestly, somewhere between 3 to 6 players. But it all depends on your group. It all depends on the people playing. And honestly, you can have as many people. I know there are games where they've had 20 people going at once. Usually that involves multiple Dungeon Masters, or multiple separate games that are kind of interconnected. But yeah, bare minimum, get a bunch of people together, more than 2. So, that then brings us to the roles. Dungeons & Dragons has 2 main roles for people who are playing the game. First of all is the player. That is pretty much everybody. Everybody but one player is a player. There's a player and the Dungeon Master. Actually, yeah, I should have mentioned both of them at the same time. Anyways, yeah, let's talk about players first. So the players are the most easiest role. A player has a character, pretty much. So your character can be defined, well, yeah, defined by four things. You have your stats. These are different ability scores. Each of these represents something about your character. There is strength, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, intelligence, and charisma. Best way to think about it, strength is about, you know, how strong you are. Dexterity is how flexible, how dexterous you are. Constitution is how well you take stuff, you know, how healthy you are. High constitution means you can probably take a few drinks. You're not going to get poisoned easily. Intelligence and wisdom get a bit confused a bit. Intelligence is how much is knowing stuff, pretty much. Wisdom is more common sense based or observation based. And then charisma is just personality or also appearance. Again, all these stats are kind of interchangeable depending on the character, but it gives you a general idea of that ability, how good or how bad you are at it. As well, you have your, they're called races in Dungeons & Dragons. They're pretty much just different species, human, elf, dwarf, halfling, which are like hobbits pretty much, and all those such things. And then you have your class. Now a class is kind of a overarching name for a type of character. So you can be a bard who's actually more of a scholar, or a wizard who's actually kind of more of a fighter, or something else outside of the range, but they're just sort of an overarching name for a bunch of abilities. Your classes have subclasses. We'll go into that probably in another video. That's not that important. Pretty much you have a race, your class, your ability scores, and last but not least, some flavor and background. This is more optional. Usually this involves alignment. There's such stuff in 5th edition called a background, which gives you some ability scores and some proficiencies. And yeah, no, you get 2 skill proficiencies and some tools, language proficiencies. It pretty much adds some spice to your character, adds some personality, some flaws, some bonds. There's a lot of them. So that would be the roles for the player. Then we come to the Dungeon Master. That's what I do a lot of the time. I've rarely gotten to play. There we go, sorry. Dungeon Master is the person who gets to run the game. Pretty much the DM is in charge of keeping track of the rules, creating the world, knowing the game, knowing the modules or the adventure that you're running, and running it for the players. They've also been called referees, or GM Game Master. DM is the Dungeon Master, which is only iconic for Dungeons & Dragons. Every other version of this role is called GM usually, or Game Master. So yeah, you're supposed to create the story around the players. You run the monsters, you run the dungeons. You are not, however, you are kind of a god, but don't be a jerk about it, right? You're not here to destroy the players or to be the opposing evil force against them, because you will always win. No, you're here to have fun with your friends, who are the other players. Remember, it is all just a game. It's your job is to just give them the setting and to supply all the other characters in that setting for them to interact with. Yeah, pretty much that's your job. Now, of course, you don't technically need a Dungeon Master. If you ever get the Dungeon Master guide, those have pre-generated dungeons in the background, like random generation. In the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, I know they had rules about how to play the game without the Dungeon Master, using those pre-generated dungeons, but it is kind of hard, so I would highly recommend having someone take the role of DM. So that brings us now to how to play. Since you now have all the stuff together, you know what all the roles are. So Dungeons & Dragons, as described in the Player's Handbook, can be defined as a 3-step process that gets repeated over and over again. Pretty much the Dungeon Master describes the environment. So I could say, you stand in a little glen. All around you are pine trees that surround you. In the middle is a rock with a glowing blue rune drawn upon it. And then we come to the next step, which is the players. So the players then describe what they want to do. So one of the players might say, I go touch the rune. Sure, so that is what the players want to do. The players go and they decide they want to touch the rune. Now it comes to step number 3. The DM then narrates what the players do, and the adventure actions that occur, and advances the story. This, I kind of agree with, but also is a bit different, right? I wouldn't, first of all, okay, as a Dungeon Master, I would always give the players some leeway in how the actions take place. Sometimes if it's a cool action, you know, for example, the guy says, I want to touch the runestone. I could say, okay, how do you want to do that? And the player might say, yeah, okay, so I want to go up very slowly, and then put my hand out, and just slowly, each step, being careful, being attentive of what's around me, just to make sure that nothing happens, and then just put my hand straight onto it. Okay. And then I would describe what happens. I wouldn't describe them putting their hand on it. Now, if the player doesn't want to really describe it, or doesn't give that much background of how they do it, then I will describe it otherwise. But assuming, let's say, right, we did this encounter, the person told me that they wanted to go up slowly to the runestone, place their hand upon it, etc. Okay, then I would say, great, so the runestone glows a vibrant blue, the whole rock turns green, and then sinks into the ground. In the hillside, you see a gate open. And then, of course, the players will then decide to do something, like go into the entranceway, and then we do this all over again. That's pretty much the essence of Dungeons & Dragons. This works for combat, it works for roleplay parts, and everything. Now I'm going to cut back to the D20, because, right, we were talking about the players wanting to do stuff. So, in Dungeons & Dragons, there's a series of ability scores, skills, and such, but in the long run, when people want to do something, they should roll one of these guys. So the D20. Actually, I'll show my bigger one. There we go, D20. 20 sides, lovely dice. Pretty much what happens is that you want to play someone decides, I want to investigate the runestone, since we're going with the runestone example here. We'd say, okay, you know what, make an investigation check. Sure, so then they will roll this, and roll it, and oh look, I got a 3. Lovely. So, yep, they get a 3, and then they would add their investigation bonus, or any other bonuses, or things that are affecting them. And then we would then decide, well, you know what, you can't tell anything about the runestone, because you rolled so low. If they rolled high, then I would give them stuff for that. That actually brings up a few other little things that involved with the D20. First of all is advantage and disadvantage. This is good for skill checks or attack rolls. Pretty much, having advantage means you roll this twice and you take the highest result. Having disadvantage is the opposite. You roll twice, you take the lowest result. And then we have nat 20s and natural ones. So, on the dice, of course, 1 is the lowest, 20 is the highest. Where's my 20? 20. Yay! Okay. Right. So when they roll a 20, that would mean, it means they got a nat 20. Now, in the book, the rule is that critical hits and critical failures, so nat 20s and nat 1s, only apply in combat, which means if you roll a 20 in combat, you automatically, it doesn't matter what you rolled, you automatically hit. It doesn't matter if your benefits are -7, and you wouldn't have hit otherwise. You've got a 20, you automatically hit, and you deal extra damage. Nat 1 means that you automatically fail, you don't deal any damage. Some people do blunder stuff with that, actually. So it means that maybe you hurt yourself when trying to draw the bow. You take 1 damage for that. But what a lot of people like to do, and I like to do this usually, is during skill checks or any other action, rolling a nat 1 usually is you've horribly failed. And of course, if you roll a nat 20, you didn't horribly fail. You succeeded brilliantly. So that would be, so those are critical hits and critical fails on the D20. That's kind of important, but again, that's up to you in the house rules. When you read over a lot of the rules, a lot of them are mainly guidelines, I find. Personally, as a DM, I like to view them as guidelines. I will modify them if I don't think they're fair, or if I think they're overpowered. I don't usually try to do much with them, but yeah, I mainly just make up a lot of them on the spot, honestly. I haven't read the climbing rules ever, actually. I just make them up when we get to the wall. Someone's like, I want to climb the wall. Okay, make an athletics check. A lot of DMing is actually about improv, but I should talk about DMing in a separate video. Anyways, we're coming to the end, so I just want to finally wrap up by talking about the different pillars of adventuring as stated in the player's handbook. Those are exploration, social, and combat. So first off is exploration. Exploration is pretty much the players exploring the environment. This is kind of the essence of Dungeons & Dragons, exploring the dungeon, explore the world that the Dungeon Master has created, visiting places, seeing cool, wondrous stuff. That's what the game's all about. So that's what exploration is all about. And it is a key piece to everything. Honestly, any piece that you do, any adventure you do, is going to involve exploration. Now we come to social interaction. So social interaction is very much roleplay based, which involves a lot less on rolling the dice and a lot more on you and the players pretending to be, well, as a dungeon master, I guess, you're pretending to be everybody else. The players are pretending to be themselves, and they interact with people. They can be trying to barter for someone's life with a dragon, for example. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with social interactions. A lot of people like to do political intrigue. I like to do that a bit. It's a lot of fun, especially schemes. But of course, not everybody likes roleplay. So that comes to the final pillar, which is combat. Everybody loves combat, of course. The murder hobos love combat. Being a murder hobo isn't necessarily bad. It all depends on what everybody wants out of the adventure. And it's kind of how they originally played the game anyways. So, combat. Very easily enough, that is about fighting everybody else in the game, or fighting things in the game. Doesn't mean that you need to go around killing everything, but let's say you get into a battle with that dragon that you were trying to negotiate with, and it didn't go well. Then that means that we come into combat, and in combat that involves rolling for initiative. First of all, you roll for initiative, and that gives everybody a turn. So all the monsters and all the players get a turn in combat, and each turn is only 6 seconds. And of course I'll talk about combat in another video, but that just gives you a bit of an idea. And at the end of combat is whenever people resolve it. That might be you killed everything. That might mean the party's all dead. It might mean you've actually managed to pull a negotiation with the dragon, or the dragon fled, or the party fled. There's lots of ways that combat can end. But that just gives you a general idea. The rule of thumb is usually that combat should last 3 to 4 rounds, or 2 to 4 rounds, something like that. So yeah, that's just a general idea. That's about it on the bare bones of Dungeons & Dragons. I'll probably make a few more videos fleshing this out. This is definitely an interesting style to do. I'd like to maybe get a green screen, remove the headset, use the green screen, maybe have a tavern in the background, call it Owen's Tavern. I'm hoping to make a few more of these. It should be lots of fun. For those who haven't watched, who are still here, on this channel, what is it? Castles and Cosmology. Yeah, we changed the name really recently. But on Castles and Cosmology, we have the Not Presently Deceased Dungeons & Dragons Adventures. I highly recommend watching those. I enjoy DMing them. The guys are great. And that's one of our big things. But this is going to probably be a new thing for me to do, about at least once a week. Talking about some Dungeons & Dragons or world building based stuff. We're going to start at the bottom and we're going to start to work our way up, talking about different pieces. I can also recommend some other videos to watch, maybe from other channels. We're going to see what happens. Yeah, so I'm hoping you enjoy this, and I hope you like and subscribe to the video. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. There's a bell, I've been told, somewhere under the screen near the subscribe button that'll notify you when we post videos. I think we're posting about twice a week, Monday and Wednesday-ish. People are busy, of course, all the time. Yeah, if you have questions, feel free to send them to the channel, or to me if you know me personally. You probably don't. But I have friends who wanted this video made, so they're the ones who will And of course, I hope you really enjoy, and I hope you will like our channel, and hope to see you next time when I make another one of these.